Hello fellow collectors, I hope you are doing very well indeed. Today I continue with my monthly series where I talk about the best films I watched in the preceding month. As I mentioned in my most recent pickups video, May is actually the month my birthday is in, and so usually a great month for watching films, as I tend to save up some of the titles that I'm most excited to see so that I can enjoy them around that time. And I really watched some fantastic stuff, including several films that I'd been wanting to check out for years now, so it was really great to tick them off my list. As I watched such a large number in May, this will actually be a much longer video than usual, and because of that, while I do always put a list of the films I talk about in these videos in the description, this time I have also added timestamps if you'd like to jump around a bit. I do usually try to keep the number of films I talk about to a consistent number each month, so I hope you'll forgive my overindulgence this month, but I simply watched too many great films that I felt compelled to talk about. Anyway, without any further ado, let's talk about the best films I watched in May. First up is Certified Copy, a film from 2010 and directed by Abbas Kiarostami. This one stars Juliette Binoche and William Schimmel. Wow, this was fantastic. This is only the second Kiarostami film I've ever seen, and unfortunately the one I started with was a bit of a lesser film of his, I think, as it was quite average, which wasn't what I was expecting considering Kiarostami's huge standing as a director. But this one, my goodness, it's clear to see from it why he is held in such high regard, as it was incredible. The film more or less just follows these two characters as they spend the day together exploring an Italian village. And that's about the extent of the story. And for such a quiet tale really, for a film that is so heavily character driven without very much story to it, I was amazed at how absolutely riveting it was. I couldn't believe how the runtime flew by. I was so incredibly engaged in their little moments, their stories, their interactions, and how they shifted and moved and parried as they verbally jousted, so to speak. Their discussions and their emotional outbursts, all of it was just enrapturing. You feel so involved. There was even a hilarious and very relatable moment where Binoche's character is in an Italian coffee shop and the chap has just stepped outside to take a phone call. And the owner of the shop, who is an older Italian lady, says to her, "So, you speak Italian, French and English, his language, and he only speaks English?" With that classic look of European disdain, which absolutely cracked me up as it's just so painfully accurate. This film is also one very much of two halves, but I'm not sure I've ever seen one be so seamless as it is here, as the film experiences a significant shift, but it's just masterfully handled by Kiarostami. Our characters really are like two stones with rough edges that just jostle, bump and rub up against each other for the entire film. For parts of it, Binoche is the more fiery aggressive, with Schimmel the more sort of demanding but reserved Englishman, until things change and he becomes the more fiery one and she the more long-suffering character, as their roles almost reverse at times. It's deeply emotional and moving and reminded me a lot of Richard Linklater's Before trilogy of films. I feel like this was almost a version of Before Midnight, but of course Certified Copy came first, as there are a lot of similarities. I'd actually be curious to know whether Linklater took inspiration from Certified Copy. Overall though, this was a wonderfully interesting journey that was worth every penny of importing the cost of the Criterion. And next up we have Shoplifters, a film highly recommended to me by my friend Sam from Sammy G's World of Cinema. This one is from 2018 and directed by the incredible Hirokazu Kore-eda. It stars Lily Frankie, Sakura Ando, Mayu Matsuoka, Kairi Jo, Kirin Kiki and the impossibly cute Miyu Sasaki. Again, wow, this was fantastic and just heartbreakingly beautiful. This is a story about family, about love, about acceptance and about choosing each other. I was really not prepared for just how moving this film would be. The highs were crazy, it was beautiful, it was so sweet, it was wondrous and magical, and the lows were just heart-wrenching. They were savage and really cut deep. This film is truly something special. There was just this wonderful essence to the film that connects straight to your heart, with people and characters that you can relate to and feel for. The story ushers you into this strange world where it's partly a rejection of modernity and society, and yet still being forced to live and exist within its boundaries. Accepting those boundaries to a certain extent, but then still remaining outside the norms. Whether that's outside of the law, the film is called Shoplifters of course, or perhaps outside of regular accommodation, or the big one, perhaps outside of a quote-unquote normal family. I think at its core this is a film about what we need to do to survive in the modern world. We have a group of people together, all working but still struggling financially. Something that couldn't be more poignant at the moment if it tried. But these people are finding strength and community with each other, and not simply enough to keep going, but dare I say it, also enough to be happy. But there is also this thread of selfishness that runs through the film, that rears its ugly head at certain moments too. A feeling of knowing how to protect yourself, extending that to others when it's convenient, but also retaining that inherent look out for number one nature perhaps. It's a film that has this dichotomy at its very centre. Overall, simply a superb watch, very moving and emotional, and undoubtedly one of my absolute favourites of the year so far. Also a film which has propelled me into buying up 3 more of kore-eda's films to explore. Then we have a rewatch for me, but my first time seeing it in 4K, and it's Dazed and Confused. From 1993, and of course directed by Richard Linklater, here we have the film that launched 1,000 careers, with the likes of Matthew McConaughey, Ben Affleck, Cole Hauser, Parker Posey, Rory Cochrane, Jason London, and the list just goes on. I've been wanting to rewatch this one for months now, and around the time it was on my mind, Criterion actually announced a UK release in 4K no less, so I immediately put a pre-order in, and I've been patiently waiting for it to turn up ever since. And so, the day it arrived, I picked up a few beers, put the film on, and then had an absolute blast revisiting this one. Forgive me for the phrase, but the vibes are just off the chart for this film. If you haven't seen it, the story basically follows a few groups of young people from the afternoon of the last day of school in 1976, going into the evening and then the night, as they talk, as they perform hazing rituals as only Americans can, as they hang out and just enjoy themselves and get into all sorts of mischief that teenagers do. You've got the cool kids, you've got the stoners, you've got the nerds, and the older bunch who should not be hanging around high school kids anymore, but still do, alright. And then you've got the younger ones who'll be starting high school after the summer. It's funny because even though I grew up in England, in a city in Yorkshire, and I went to secondary school in the early noughties, and so really my experience couldn't have been further away from the kids depicted in this film, set in Texas in 1976. It is actually astonishingly similar, and just reminds me that none of us are all that different. You know, I remember cruising around my area in my parents' car once I got a licence, and meeting up with my other friends who were doing the same. And my mum does watch these videos, so let me assure her that I took utmost care of the car and treated it with all due respect. But I also remember spending those warm summer nights hanging out with my friends and enjoying ourselves as we met up with other big groups of kids. There's just this timeless quality to this film that works so incredibly well, and it can't help but make you think about your own experiences. It's also surely got one of the greatest soundtracks of any film. The 70s were undoubtedly a top-tier decade for music, and Linklater seems to have managed to acquire the rights to so many of the great ones which we can enjoy in this film. It's full of classic and quotable lines, though mostly from Matthew McConaughey to be fair. It's funny, it's cool, it's smooth as it moves seamlessly throughout the course of one summer afternoon and night, and it's just a fantastic time. It also shares a lot in common with American Graffiti, though of course that film was set in the early 60s. But similarly, that is set over the course of one night as high school has ended and the kids are driving around looking for fun. So if you haven't seen that but enjoyed this one, or of course vice versa, I can highly recommend it. But overall, this was a fantastic film to revisit and lived up to my memories and more. Next up, we have Mosquito Coast, a film from 1986 and directed by the great Peter Weir and written by Paul Schrader. It stars Harrison Ford, Helen Mirren, River Phoenix, Jadrian Steele, Conrad Roberts and Andre Gregory, who you might recognise from My Dinner with Andre. This is a film I've wanted to watch for so many years, but for some reason it's been almost impossible to find for the longest time and remains hard to get hold of even today, particularly on Blu-ray, but just in physical media in general. Though I will say there is a German DVD that does currently seem to be available from Amazon. But there's also been almost no stream of it for the longest time either. Recently though, by chance, I came across a HD stream on Amazon Prime, but sadly it was one of those really annoying ones where you can't rent it, you just have to buy it digitally if you want to watch it, but as it had been on my list for well over 10 years, I decided to just do it and forked out the $7.99. Considering the calibre of the cast and director and writer, it's just a bit crazy to me that this film isn't more easily accessible. Anyway, despite wanting to watch this one for so long, I didn't really know all that much about it. From what little I'd seen, I was expecting something very wholesome, something like a Swiss Family Robinson type of film where a young family moves out to live in a jungle and has an adventure. Well, considering Paul Schrader wrote this and considering Peter Weir directed it, I probably should have known better and should have known that this would have a lot more depth to it. Indeed, because of my assumed expectations, after almost immediately seeing that Harrison Ford was kind of playing against type in some ways, as he plays this colossal ass, he is almost insufferable here. It just meant that I wasn't really enjoying it all that much to begin with, until of course it got going and I sort of settled into the story. The basic story here is of a family that gives up living in the United States because the dad thinks that it's all going downhill, that society is on its way to crumbling, and so they decide to move to the jungle in Belize, where he wants to set up a self-sustaining community based upon better principles. This is really a film which explores the idea of choosing your personal dreams over your family's well-being. Ford's character here is extremely intelligent, and he revels in his own brilliance to a certain extent, and he has an arrogance about him because of that. Intelligence should be a tool where you can see the wider picture more clearly than others, but here I think it's actually the opposite, and I think it just puts blinkers on him and gives him this tunnel vision so that he can't see any other way than the way which he wants to go. This character has fooled himself into thinking that no challenge is too great for him to be able to conquer, and I do mean him rather than his family altogether. He has this arrogance not just against other people, but also against nature itself, and it's really quite shocking to watch. It's a story that makes you angry to see his selfishness, which he disguises as love for his family. He has this "it's for their own good" sort of attitude, though you know and he knows deep down that it's purely because he cannot face the idea of returning to their home. He can't even face the idea of failure, which I think is hinted at and foreshadowed in some subtle information towards the beginning of the film. This was a much more harrowing tale than I was expecting, especially thinking that this was going to be some sweet family story, so boy was I in for a surprise. I think this would be a great companion piece to a film like Leave No Trace, if you've seen that, as they share many similarities, though I'd say that that film has a much more positive spin to it. Next up, and we have another rewatch for me, though it's been many years since I last saw it, and it's The Hustler, a film from 1961 and directed by Robert Rossen, and this one stars Paul Newman, Jackie Gleason, Piper Laurie, George C. Scott and Myron McCormick. After watching The Abyss recently, I started looking into Mary Elizabeth Mastrantonio's other films, and I saw that she was in The Colour of Money, which is a much later sequel to this film, The Hustler. And I couldn't remember if I'd seen that one or not, but I knew I only had The Hustler on DVD. So I thought I'd seek both of them out on Blu-ray, and managed to get hold of these lovely steelbook editions. Well, I remember loving this film when I first saw it, but my goodness, it was an incredible one to rediscover, and one that surpassed my memories in every way. I think surely this must have one of the best scripts that's ever been written. There are so many scenes which are just incredible to watch. The dialogue is so powerfully honest and real, with struggling and broken people exploring their brokenness and problems, exploring their addictions and shortcomings with sober and sombre, matter-of-fact language. There are so many powerful scenes, particularly a good few between Newman and Piper Laurie, who not only have this fantastic chemistry, but It's not one that romantically sizzles as you might expect, but it's a chemistry born from both of their incredible acting talents that feels like two broken people drawn into each other's orbit to prop each other up. They also share these brutally honest moments where they see each other's bitterness from past poor decisions and their failings and their shame. It's powerful stuff to watch, and the melodrama here is really superb. Newman in particular is so fantastic as the young pool player with all the skill in the world, as he hustles everyone and everything, including of course himself. George C. Scott tells him it's character that he needs to develop, and boy does he develop some. I can't say enough good things about this film. It has elements of a film noir to it, and there's this sort of dour, almost oppressive nature to some of the scenes that really hooks you as you watch, as it's just this engrossing story. I also recently watched The Gambler with James Caan, and this film definitely felt like a fantastic complementary piece. And then last but not least, we have Stranger Than Paradise. From 1984 and directed by the brilliant Jim Jarmusch, it stars John Lurie, Esther Ballant and Richard Edson. Now, this should be the most boring film ever, and it simply amazed me at how Jarmusch can take the mundane and make it riveting. We have these poor working class, or really criminal class maybe, characters, and they're in scenes where sometimes there's long awkward silences. Scenes where they're just relaxing, hanging out, maybe not even speaking, but just smoking or watching TV. And it's all just this very realistic look at normal life. But somehow it's brilliant. And I'm just not sure how. It's not that it's in black and white, or even the way that he shoots it. It's just somehow Jarmusch manages to infuse intrigue into every scene. He gives us these great characters and then just lets things play out and just turns it into something so incredibly engaging. We have a film here that is part road trip, part slacker film with added elements of crime, and also one that I think has a lot to say about immigration and identity. I think there's some great commentary here about wanting to be perceived as American despite being an immigrant. I think there's also a level of wanting to attain the American dream by merely osmosis and not really doing anything to get it, yet simply by being in the States, in the land of opportunity, you have access to more, whatever that may be. It's a film where the day by day is particularly prevalent, and by that I mean we watch these characters surviving just on a day by day basis. It's let's watch TV today, or let's gamble tomorrow, let's go on vacation the next day. It's a life with no future, and just taking each day as it comes and making spontaneous choices on the fly. Maybe they'll be in poverty one day, but then in riches the next. There's also so many strange scenes. There's one fantastic one where the two main guys crash a date, just making it hilariously awkward. And then there's also scenes where some characters reunite, but despite the joy in reuniting, they don't really then have all that much to say. There's just some brilliant humour woven into this strange and wonderful tale. It's quite a hard one to pin down, but it's definitely a film that is fully infused with the brilliant writing and storytelling of Jarmusch. A great watch overall, and one with a fantastic and perfect ending. And then returning to a segment that I've really been enjoying doing over the last few months, where I discuss any films that I might not have fully made my mind upon yet, or ones that might have been particularly mysterious or curious, or that were just intriguing in some way so that they linger with you. And I have just one of those films this month, and it's Air Doll. I've had this one on my radar for a while, and actually a couple months ago sadly lost out on an auction on eBay for the Decalogue edition. But I picked up this edition straight after watching Shoplifters actually, because it's another one directed by Hirokazu Kore-eda. It stars the great Korean actress Bae Doona, who I am a big fan of, as she plays a sex doll that comes to life. And despite that being its story, there is really no seediness or creepiness here at all. On the contrary, Kore-eda weaves a truly beautiful tale about viewing modern society from the outside. It's all about taking a look at the substitutes that we use in modern society for other people. Be they substitutes for human intimacy, or for being social, or for protection even. and the film explores the isolating aspects of these substitutes. As a society, we've almost fooled ourselves into thinking that they're better, maybe because they require less effort, like typing a reply on a computer instead of meeting someone in person and speaking to them, which of course involves more effort and also an element of vulnerability. Or maybe because we're ashamed of some aspect of ourselves, like our appearance for example, and so we know a substitute won't judge us. But the fact is that they are always going to be a cheap facsimile for true human interaction and real community. There is also a thread of seeing the beauty in the world, as we see Baiduna's character marvel at what she sees around her, even the most mundane things. It reminds us that we do live in a magical world, yet we often take it for granted as we go about our lives, rushing from A to B and back again. But if only we stopped for a minute and took delight at the beauty all around us. This was a really special film that I thoroughly enjoyed, with such a good heart to it, though I will say I wasn't a huge fan of the ending. And then finally we are on to my honourable mentions, and as you might have guessed, there are a good few this month. I'll start off with both Ocean's 11 and Ocean's 12. I was so excited to get the 4K steelbooks of these, though I will say that both of the steelbooks are really disappointing, as instead of a white colour as the background, it's this weird browny beige which just looks awful in my opinion. But nevertheless, I love both of these films and I had a blast revisiting them. I've never owned them on either Blu-ray or DVD before, so this was a fantastic first time watch on physical media. Then we have the hilarious The Thin Man with William Powell and Myrna Loy, a great murder mystery screwball comedy. I then rewatched one of my absolute favourites, which was Alfred Hitchcock's To Catch a Thief, which remains so wonderful with glorious performances from both Grace Kelly and Cary Grant. Then we have The Salvation, which was a brilliant western with Mads Mikkelsen. Then we've got Hard Times with Charles Bronson, which I thoroughly enjoyed. Next is The Unbelievable Truth, a film by Hal Hartley which I thought was fantastic, but just not one that I had an awful lot to say about, but still really enjoyed another dark comedy from him. Then we have The Gambler with James Caan that I mentioned earlier, and if you enjoyed Uncut Gems but haven't seen this, definitely check it out. I feel like The Gambler walked so that Uncut Gems could run. And then last but not least, quite a fun one called Linda Linda Linda, from which I still have the song stuck in my head even though it was weeks ago that I watched it. This one also stars Bayduna, but sadly it isn't available in the UK on any imprint DVD and not on Blu-ray at all, but it is on YouTube thankfully, and one that I can definitely recommend to lighten your spirits if you need it. And finally, that brings us to the end of the video and the end of my May in film. And well, if you stuck with me the whole way, thank you so much for your time and for letting me wax lyrical about all these wonderful films. I hope you also had a fantastic May and watched some great movies, and I hope your June is going wonderfully well too. Well, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.